I wasn't invited. My son didn't say it loudly. He didn't shout. He didn't even look angry. That was the worst part, that he said it like he had practiced it. Like it had already been decided long before I arrived. It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Ohio. The kind of spring day where everything feels like it should be beginning again. Trees turning green, soft wind moving through the parking lot, sunlight reflecting off the glass doors of the wedding venue. I remember standing there for a moment, just holding my small gift box. Inside was a handmade silver bracelet. Nothing expensive, just something I spent weeks working on after dinner when the house was quiet. I thought it would mean something to him, something personal, something from his mother. I was wearing my navy blue dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I had even gone to the salon that morning to get my hair done, not because I wanted attention, but because I wanted to look appropriate, respectful, presentable. It was my son's wedding day, and I believed I was supposed to be there. I took one step forward toward the entrance. That's when he appeared. My son, Daniel, tall, nervous, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that made him look older than I remembered. For a second, I thought he was coming to hug me, but instead, he moved sideways, not toward me, between me and the door. He didn't touch me. He didn't raise his voice. He simply positioned himself there, like a barrier. "Mom," he said quietly, "you weren't invited." I blinked at first. I thought I misunderstood him. Maybe I misheard over the music coming from inside. Maybe it was a joke, a misunderstanding, anything but what it sounded like. What do you mean?" I asked softly. He finally looked at me, but not the way a son looks at his mother. It was controlled, careful, like he was trying not to feel anything at all. "Melissa thought it would be better this way," he said. "Melissa." Even before he finished saying her name, I already felt my chest tighten. My daughter-in-law, the woman who once smiled at me at dinner tables, who once called me mom, with a voice that sounded almost real. I looked past him, through the glass doors. Inside, I could see movement. Guests arriving. Women in pastel dresses. Men adjusting their ties. A string quartet warming up in the corner. Life was happening, without me. "I don't understand," I said again. My voice was quieter now. Not angry, not loud, just confused. "This is your wedding, Daniel." His jaw tightened slightly. "I know." That was all he said. No explanation after that. No apology. Just silence stretching between us like something neither of us knew how to break. I held the gift box a little tighter. My hands started to feel cold, even though the sun was warm on my shoulders. "I drove 2 hours," I said, almost to myself. "I know," he replied. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something deeper, recognition, like my presence here had already been accounted for and rejected before I even arrived. A woman walking into the venue slowed down when she saw us. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I noticed the way she whispered something to the man beside her. I suddenly became aware of everything. My dress, my silence, my existence at the wrong place, at the wrong moment. "I just wanted to see my son get married," I said softly. Daniel swallowed. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in his face. Guilt, or maybe memory, but it disappeared quickly. "I think it's better if you leave, Mom," he said. Not harsh, not cruel, just final, like closing a door without slamming it. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure why I did. Maybe because I didn't trust my voice anymore. Maybe because if I spoke again, something inside me might break completely. I took one step back, then another. The gravel under my shoes felt louder than it should have been. Behind him, I could hear music starting to build inside the hall. The wedding was continuing, without me, and as I turned toward my car, I realized something I hadn't expected to feel that day. It wasn't just that I wasn't invited. It was that I had been removed, quietly, carefully, like I no longer belonged in the story I thought I helped create. And still, I didn't cry. Not yet. I simply held my gift a little tighter and walked away. I didn't remember the walk back to my car very clearly. It was strange how the body can keep moving even when the mind has stopped processing what just happened. One step, then another, then another. That was all I could manage. The wedding venue music grew softer behind me, but I could still feel it in my chest, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me anymore. I sat in my car for a long time without starting the engine. The gift box was still in my hands. That small silver bracelet suddenly felt heavier than it should have, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. time, effort, hope, all of it, returned to me at a door I wasn't allowed to enter. When I finally turned the key, the engine sounded too loud in the silence of my thoughts. I drove without direction at first, just away, away from the venue, away from the voices, away from the moment my son looked at me like I didn't belong in his life anymore. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. A woman I almost didn't recognize. Hair perfectly done, makeup still intact, a navy dress chosen with care. But her eyes looked like she had just been erased from somewhere she once called home. That was the first moment I felt something rise inside me. Not tears, not yet. Something colder. Awareness. I started replaying everything. His voice. Mom, you weren't invited. Melissa's name. The way he avoided my eyes. The way he didn't even hesitate. It wasn't confusion. It was coordination. Decisions had been made before I arrived, and I was not part of them. By the time I reached my house, the sun had already started to lower in the sky. The driveway looked the same as always. Too normal. That was what hurt the most. Inside, everything was quiet. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood in the hallway, still holding the gift box. My house smelled like old wood and lavender cleaner. Familiar. Safe. But it didn't feel safe anymore. It felt empty in a different way. Not because no one was there, but because I realized no one had thought about whether I should be there at all. I finally set the gift box on the kitchen table, carefully, like it might break something if I dropped it too hard. Then I sat down, just sat there. No phone calls, no messages, no noise. For a while, I thought maybe Daniel would text, explain, say it was a mistake. But my phone stayed still, silent. That silence told me more than any words could have. Hours passed like that. At some point, I noticed my hands were still slightly shaking. Not from sadness, from disbelief that had nowhere left to go. When the sun finally disappeared completely, the house grew darker than I expected. I didn't move. Instead, I found myself thinking back to when Daniel was a child. Small things. How he used to fall asleep on the couch waiting for me to come home from double shifts. How he used to run to the door when I returned, like I was the most important person in the world. At some point, I whispered into the empty kitchen. When did I stop being that person? There was no answer. Only the hum of the refrigerator. I stood up slowly and walked to the sink. Turned on the water. Let it run over my hands. It felt grounding. Real. But even then, I couldn't shake the image of the wedding door closing in front of me. Not slammed. Not violently. Just final. Like I was never part of the invitation to begin with. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at nothing. My phone lit up once around midnight. A notification. I froze for a second before picking it up. It was a photo. From someone I didn't know well, one of Daniel's friends. The wedding had started. Bright lights. Smiling guests. Daniel standing at the altar. And Melissa beside him, glowing in white. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I stared at the screen until it dimmed again. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Quietly. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But permanently. Because I finally understood something I had refused to see before that day. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about where I stood in my son's life now. And more importantly, where I no longer did. I placed the phone face down on the table. And for the first time that night, I spoke out loud into the empty room. This isn't the end of my story. And even though no one answered, I believed it. I didn't expect the first crack in the silence to come from a stranger. It was the next morning. I was still sitting in the same chair in the living room when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. But something inside me, maybe habit, maybe instinct, made me press accept. Hello. There was a pause. Then a woman's voice. Hesitant. Careful. Mrs. Carter? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. I think I was at your son's wedding yesterday. My hand tightened around the phone. I didn't speak immediately. Something about her tone made my stomach tighten. Yes, I said slowly. I was there too. A breath on the other end. I saw what happened at the entrance. Silence. My heart didn't race. It stopped in a different way, like it had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. I didn't mean to stare, she continued quickly. It just didn't feel right. I stood up without realizing it. Walked slowly toward the kitchen window. Outside, everything looked normal. Birds, morning light, a neighbor watering plants. But nothing inside me matched that normality anymore. What do you mean? I asked. Her voice dropped. Your son didn't want you there, but it didn't seem like his decision alone. I closed my eyes. Melissa. Even hearing her name and someone else's implication made something tighten in my chest. The woman continued. I overheard something before the ceremony started. That was the moment everything inside me went still. Not fear. Not sadness. Focus. What did you hear? I asked. A long hesitation. Then, his wife said, we can't let her influence anything today. Not the guest list, not the photos, not the narrative. I repeated the words silently in my head. The narrative. Not the wedding. Not the celebration. The narrative. Something cold moved through me. Are you sure? I asked. I wouldn't call you if I wasn't, she said. I thought you should know you weren't just uninvited. You were intentionally excluded. After she hung up, I stayed standing in the kitchen for a long time. The phone still in my hand. My reflection in the window looked older than before. Not physically, but in something deeper. Like something inside me had crossed a line it couldn't return from. That day, I didn't cry either. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my old filing cabinet. Not the one for bills. The one I never touched unless I needed to remember who I was before I became just a mother. Inside were documents, photos, old records, and something I had almost forgotten about. Legal paperwork from years ago. When Daniel was still in college, I had co-signed something for him. A loan. A business investment later disguised as help from family. Melissa had been there even then. Always close. Always observing. Always present in conversations she wasn't officially part of. As I flipped through the papers, another memory surfaced. A conversation I had dismissed at the time. Melissa once asked me, casually, over dinner, do you think parents should control too much of their children's decisions after they become adults? I remembered smiling then, thinking it was an innocent question. Now it felt different. Strategic. That evening, I drove past Daniel's house. I told myself I wasn't going to stop, but I did anyway. From the street, I could see cars still parked outside. The wedding hadn't fully ended. Guests were still there. Laughter still existed in that house. A life I was not part of. And then I saw her, Melissa, through the front window, standing near Daniel, talking, smiling. Not the smile she used in front of me. This one was different. Confident. Controlled. Like someone who had successfully arranged every piece of a puzzle exactly the way she wanted. And Daniel was listening. Not speaking much. Just listening. The same way he used to listen to me when he was a child. I stayed in the car for a long time. My hands resting on the steering wheel. My heart surprisingly calm. Because something had shifted again. The pain was still there. But now it had direction. Not chaos. Clarity. By the time I drove home, I had already made my first decision. Not emotional. Not reactive. Intentional. I wasn't going to fight them. Not yet. I was going to understand them. Completely. Because exclusion is one thing. But being rewritten out of your own family is something else entirely. And I had no intention of disappearing quietly. That night, I wrote 3 words in my journal. I will see. And for the first time since the wedding door closed in my face, I felt awake. The first real change didn't come with anger. It came with silence that I finally chose myself. 3 days after the call, I stopped waiting for explanations that were never coming. No apology from Daniel. No clarification from Melissa. No message. No explanation. Nothing. At first, I kept checking my phone more than I wanted to admit. Every vibration made my chest tighten. But slowly, even that stopped. Because I realized something important. They were not ignoring me accidentally. They were maintaining distance on purpose. And once I accepted that, something inside me stopped breaking and started organizing. On the morning of the 4th day, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I slept well. I didn't. But because my mind refused to stay still any longer. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. And I opened my laptop for the first time since the wedding. The screen felt almost unfamiliar, like a tool I had abandoned without noticing. I typed Daniel's full name. The search results came quickly. Too quickly. Social media profiles. Business mentions. Wedding announcements. Tag photos. I clicked on one of the wedding photos I had seen before. This time from a public album posted by Melissa's cousin. There they were. Daniel and Melissa. Standing under soft golden lights. Smiling like nothing had ever been wrong. And I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. The positioning. Melissa wasn't just beside him. She was slightly in front. Just enough to be subtle. Just enough to signal control. I leaned back in my chair. That detail stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was intentional. Everything about that wedding now felt intentional. Even my absence. I closed the laptop, and instead of spiraling again, I did something different. I started writing. Not emotions. Facts. Dates. Names. Small interactions I had ignored at the time. Melissa's comments over the years that I once dismissed as modern thinking. Daniel's increasing distance over the past year. Canceled dinners. Short phone calls. Delayed responses. Each line on the page made something clearer. This didn't begin at the wedding. The wedding was just the final door closing. Around noon, I made another decision. I drove to the storage facility I hadn't visited in years. Inside my unit were boxes I had almost forgotten existed. Old documents, family records, insurance papers, financial agreements. Things most people stop thinking about once life moves forward. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but I knew I needed to see everything again. I spent hours there, sitting on the cold concrete floor, opening box after box, until I found something that made me pause. A folder labeled in Daniel's handwriting. Startup support, MOM. Inside were early business documents, loan agreements, personal guarantees. My signature was on several pages. I stared at them for a long time, not because I regretted helping him, but because I realized something else. At some point, I had become part of his foundation, but not part of his present. And someone had decided that foundation no longer needed to be acknowledged. When I left the storage unit, the sky was already turning orange. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I drove past a familiar street, Daniel's office building. I parked across the road. I didn't go inside. I just watched. People coming in and out. Phones ringing. A life moving forward efficiently without me. And then I saw him, Daniel, walking out of the building with a group of colleagues. Laughing slightly. Relaxed. Normal. It struck me then how quickly someone can learn to look unaffected. Like nothing had ever shifted. Like no door had ever closed in their face. I stayed in the car long after he disappeared from view. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself why I wasn't invited. Instead, I asked a different question. Who decided I shouldn't be? That question didn't hurt the same way. It didn't collapse inward. It expanded outward. Because now there was direction. That night, I didn't go back to sadness. I went back to my journal. And I wrote only one line. They didn't remove me from a wedding. They removed me from influence. And then, after a pause, I need to understand how far that decision goes. I closed the book, and for the first time since the wedding day, I wasn't grieving my absence anymore. I was studying it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was crying. Not because I was broken. But because my mind refused to stay quiet anymore. It kept replaying everything. Daniel's voice at the wedding, the way he blocked the entrance, the silence after he said I wasn't invited. And now, something else was added to that memory. The phone call. The stranger's words. You weren't just uninvited. You were intentionally excluded. That sentence didn't hurt the way it should have. Instead, it sharpened something inside me. Like a blade slowly being revealed. By morning, I wasn't the same woman who stood at that wedding door. I was quieter, but not empty. Focused. I made breakfast I didn't eat. Poured coffee I let go cold. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my financial folder. The one I kept locked away, not out of secrecy, but out of habit. A life built on trust doesn't usually require constant checking. Or so I thought. Inside were documents I had once signed without hesitation. Loans for Daniel. Support for his first apartment. Early investments in his business before it became successful enough to be called independent. Every page had my name on it. Every page represented belief. Not control. Not ownership. Just trust. But now, those pages felt different. They didn't feel like love anymore. They felt like evidence. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Daniel. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Mom, he said. His voice was careful, measured, like someone walking through unstable ground. I just wanted to check on you. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was too late for that sentence. I'm fine, I said. A pause. Then he added, about the wedding. I hope you understand it wasn't personal. That word again. Personal. As if exclusion could ever be impersonal. I understand, I said quietly. And I meant it. I understood more than he realized. Another pause. I'll come by this weekend, he said. I think we should talk. I didn't answer immediately. because something in me had already started rewriting the meaning of talk. Finally, I said, "If you come honestly." He didn't respond right away. That hesitation told me everything. After the call ended, I sat by the window for a long time, watching cars pass, watching normal life continue as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. That afternoon, I drove somewhere I hadn't been in years. Not Daniel's house, not the wedding venue. Somewhere quieter. A small cafe near the river. A place where no one knew me. I sat in the corner and opened my notebook. At first, I wrote names. Then dates. Then patterns. Melissa's name appeared more times than I expected. Not loud moments. Small ones. Careful ones. Comments that sounded polite on the surface, but always carried direction underneath. "You should rest more, Mrs. Carter. We've already handled it for you. I think it's better if you don't worry about this part." At the time, I had thought it was kindness. Now I saw it differently. It wasn't kindness. It was positioning. Slowly removing me from decisions without making it obvious. Replacing presence with absence. Authority with comfort. By the time I finished writing, my hand hurt slightly. But my mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. As I closed the notebook, I noticed an older woman sitting across the cafe. Watching me. Not rudely. Not obviously. Just observing. When our eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she gave a small nod. Like recognition. Like she understood something I hadn't said out loud. She stood up after a moment and walked over. "Sorry," she said gently. "I don't mean to intrude." Her voice was calm. Familiar in a strange way. I just recognized that look. I didn't respond immediately. She gestured toward my notebook. That's the look of someone who just realized they were removed from a story they helped build. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not pain. Truth. She sat down without asking. "My son did something similar," she said simply. I looked at her then. Really looked. And for the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel alone in the same kind of silence. She continued, "It doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly. Until one day, you're standing outside your own place in the world, wondering when the door closed." I didn't know why, but my voice came out. "Steady. I think I'm still at the door." She nodded. "That's the most important moment," she said. "Because that's when you still have choices." We talked for a while after that. Not about revenge. Not about anger. But about clarity. About what happens when family stops being family quietly. When exclusion is not loud, but strategic. When love becomes structure instead of feeling. When presence is replaced by permission. By the time I left the cafe, the sun was lower in the sky. And something inside me had settled into place. Not revenge. Not emotion. Direction. That night, I wrote only one sentence in my journal. I am no longer asking why I was excluded. I am asking who benefited from it. And for the first time since the wedding door closed in my face, I didn't feel like someone who was shut out. I felt like someone beginning to see the system clearly. Daniel didn't come that weekend. He texted instead. Something came up. "We'll talk later." That was all. No apology. No reschedule. Just distance reasserted. I stared at the message for a long time without reacting. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't anymore. Something inside me had already started expecting this pattern. The delay. The avoidance. The quiet disappearance of responsibility. And now, I could see it for what it was. Control doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives as postponement. As silence dressed up as inconvenience. As later. That morning, I went grocery shopping. A normal thing. But even normal things feel different once you start seeing patterns. At the store, I caught myself noticing small details I would have ignored before. A couple laughing too loudly in aisle 5. A mother correcting her son with too much patience. A cashier avoiding eye contact with an older customer. Everything suddenly looked like behavior. Not coincidence. I was becoming aware in a way I hadn't been before. When I returned home, I found something unexpected. A package on my doorstep. No sender name. Just my address written neatly. I didn't open it immediately. I just stood there, looking at it, for a long time. Then I brought it inside, placed it on the kitchen table, and sat down. My hands didn't shake this time. That surprised me. Slowly, I opened it. Inside was a folder. Printed documents. Meeting summaries. Emails. My eyes moved across the pages carefully, and then I saw it. My name. Not as mother. Not as support. But as something else entirely. Non-participating stakeholder. I read the phrase again. Slowly. As if reading it differently might change its meaning. It didn't. There were notes attached. Internal communication between Daniel and someone in his company. Planning language. Structured decisions. Not emotional. Operational. One line stood out. Limit family influence in personal decision-making space. Family influence. That was me. Not as a person, but as a factor to be reduced. My chest tightened, but not with shock. With confirmation. Melissa's words echoed in my mind again. You weren't just uninvited. You were intentionally excluded. Now I understood what intentionally really meant. It wasn't emotional rejection. It was strategic design. I closed the folder slowly, then opened it again. Because once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. That afternoon, I drove past Daniel's office again. This time, I didn't park. I just slowed down. Watched. People moved in and out like pieces on a board. Efficient. Unaware. And then I saw her. Melissa. Standing near the entrance. Talking on the phone. Her posture calm. Controlled. Like someone who didn't react to situations, she managed them. Even from a distance, I could recognize the rhythm of her influence now. It wasn't loud. It was directional. She didn't push. She guided outcomes so subtly that the person being moved never noticed they were being moved. I sat in the car for a long time after that. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain watching them. I felt structure. Patterns. Mechanism. That was more dangerous than emotion. Because emotion makes you react. But clarity makes you decide. When I got home, I didn't go inside immediately. I sat in the driveway, thinking, not about what they had done, but about what I would do now that I understood how it was being done. Inside the house, everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same inside it anymore. That night, I made my first intentional boundary. I didn't call Daniel back. I didn't reply to the message. I let silence exist, but this time, it was mine. Later, I wrote in my journal, they are not pushing me away. They are managing my distance. And then I added something I didn't expect to write. I will stop being managed. I closed the book. And for the first time since the wedding, I wasn't reacting to my exclusion anymore. I was studying the system that created it. I expected silence after that. But silence, I learned, is never stable for long in families built on control. It always shifts shape. 2 days after I refused to respond to Daniel, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't a message. It was him. I stared at his name on the screen for a full minute before answering. Mom, he said immediately, almost too quickly, like he had been holding the word back. I need to see you. Not can I. Not do you want. Just a statement. I didn't answer right away, because something in his tone felt different. Less careful. Less filtered. More exposed. When I asked finally. Today, he said. I'm outside your house. I turned my head toward the window, and there he was. His car parked at the curb like he had been waiting for a moment like this all week. I didn't move immediately. Not fear. Not hesitation. Observation. Because now I understood something important. Nothing in this family happened randomly anymore. Everything was scheduled. Everything was placed. Even silence. I opened the door slowly. Daniel stood there, still in his work clothes. No wedding suit. No ceremony mask. Just a man trying to look like he was in control of something that was already slipping. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked at me like he was searching for the version of me he remembered. I could tell he didn't find it immediately. Mom, he said again, softer this time. I think things have gotten complicated. That word again. Complicated. The word people use when they don't want to name what they've already decided. I stepped outside. Closed the door behind me. Complicated for who? I asked. He exhaled sharply. This isn't about you being excluded, he said. It's about stability. There it was. Stability. The word that always sounds reasonable. Always sounds responsible. But underneath it, I could feel something else. Control dressed as logic. Melissa thinks, he started. I raised my hand slightly. Not to stop him, but because I didn't need to hear her name to know she was already inside this conversation. You don't need to tell me what Melissa thinks, I said quietly. That surprised him. I saw it in his face. A flicker of something unprepared. He wasn't used to me not following the script. He paused. I thought it would be easier this way. Easier for who? I repeated. This time, he didn't answer immediately. That silence was louder than anything he had said so far. I looked at him closely. Really closely. Not as my son, but as someone I was finally seeing without the filter of memory. You didn't come here to talk, I said. You came here to make me accept something I didn't agree to. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fair. Another word used when someone loses control of the narrative. I nodded slowly. I see, I said. And I meant it. Because I did see. Not everything. But enough. The structure. The positioning. The pressure behind the softness. The way decisions were already made before conversations began. Daniel stepped forward slightly. Mom, I don't want this to turn into something bigger. I almost smiled. Because that was exactly what it already was. Just not in the way he meant. I don't want it to be bigger either, I said calmly. Then I added, but I also don't want to disappear inside it. That line hung between us. He didn't respond immediately. For the first time, he looked unsure. Not guilty. Not defensive. Just unsettled. Like he had expected compliance, not clarity. Behind him, a car passed slowly down the street. Normal life continuing around something that wasn't normal at all. I should go, he finally said. But he didn't move immediately. Because part of him was still waiting for me to collapse the way I used to. To soften. To absorb. To return to my old role. But I didn't. And that changed the air between us. When he finally turned away, I didn't stop him. I just stood there, watching him walk back to his car. Not as a mother losing her son, but as someone recognizing that the relationship they thought they had already been rewritten without their permission. And that realization didn't break me. It clarified me. When he drove away, I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed outside for a while, feeling the air, feeling the absence of urgency. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to their timing. I was outside of it. That night, I didn't write much in my journal. Only one sentence. They are still trying to negotiate my acceptance. I paused, then added, but I am no longer negotiating my presence. And for the first time since the wedding, I understood something fundamental. This was no longer about being included. It was about whether I would allow myself to be defined by exclusion. After Daniel left, I didn't go back inside. I stayed on the porch longer than I should have. The air was cooler than I expected for that time of day. Not cold, just distant. Like everything around me had taken one step back. That was when I realized something simple. My life had changed direction without asking me. Not in one moment, but in layers. Like paint drying over something already decided underneath. I sat down on the porch step. Not because I was tired, but because standing felt unnecessary now. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for a message. Not from Daniel. Not from anyone. That absence should have felt empty. Instead, it felt clean. Like noise had finally been removed. I closed my eyes for a moment. And when I opened them again, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. My house. Not as home, but as structure. Walls. Doors. Rooms. Things that could be entered. Or exited. Controlled. That word came back again. Controlled. But this time, I didn't feel inside it. I felt outside it. Like I had stepped out of the system without realizing when the step happened. That evening, I did something I didn't plan. I went through old photo albums. Not digital ones. Physical ones. The kind you don't scroll, you hold. Daniel at 8 years old, holding a school trophy. Daniel at 16, awkward in a suit at graduation. Daniel at 23, standing beside me in his first apartment. Every picture had the same pattern. I was always slightly behind him. Supporting. Present. But never central. At the time, I thought that was natural. That motherhood meant stepping back. Now I wondered something else. Had I been stepping back, or had I been gently repositioned? The thought didn't come with emotion. It came with precision. That was new. I continued flipping through pages until I found something unexpected. A letter. Old. Folded carefully. From Daniel. Written years ago. Before Melissa. Before weddings. Before any of this. In it, he wrote, "Mom, I don't know how to do this without you. You always make things clearer for me." I held that sentence for a long time. Because it didn't match the man who blocked me from a wedding door. Something had changed him. Or someone had reshaped the space around him until my influence no longer fit inside it. I didn't feel anger reading it. I felt distance. Not emotional distance. Structural distance. Like looking at a bridge that used to connect two places, but had been rebuilt without one side. That night, I received another message. Not from Daniel. From Melissa. Just one line. "I think we should all move forward peacefully." Peacefully. That word again. I stared at it for a long time. Because peace is often what people call it when they've already decided the outcome. I didn't reply. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something important. Every reply I had ever given before had been used as placement. As positioning. As confirmation of my role in their structure. This time, I refused to play that function. Instead, I opened my journal, and I wrote, "They are not asking me to accept peace. They are asking me to accept my absence." Then I paused. My pen hovered, and I added something I didn't expect. I no longer confuse absence with peace. The next morning, I drove without destination. No appointment. No purpose tied to anyone else. Just movement. For the first time in years, I chose where I was going based on nothing but direction. Not obligation. Not expectation. Not family gravity pulling me somewhere I didn't choose. At a stoplight, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, and I noticed something subtle. My face looked the same, but my expression didn't. It was no longer searching, no longer waiting to be seen. That realization should have been small, but it wasn't. It felt like the first true shift in a long time. Not in what they did, but in what I no longer required from them. When I got home, I placed Daniel's old letter back into the box. Carefully, not as memory, but as reference. Something I could return to when needed. Not for comfort, but for clarity. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off. Not in sadness, not in anger, just awareness. And I finally understood what had been happening all along. I was never just being excluded from an event. I was being gradually removed from influence. And now that I could see it clearly, I also understood something else. Removal only works when you believe you are still inside the structure. And I no longer did. Before sleeping, I wrote one final line. I am no longer inside their version of my life. And for the first time since the wedding, that sentence didn't feel like loss. It felt like entry into something else. Something I hadn't named yet, but was no longer afraid of. The shift didn't happen loudly. There was no dramatic realization, no emotional collapse. Just a quiet morning where I noticed something different. I didn't reach for my phone first. That alone was new. For weeks, my mornings had started with waiting. Waiting for a message, a call, a correction, an explanation that never arrived. But that morning, I made coffee first. And only then did I check my phone. Nothing. No Daniel. No Melissa. No correction of my reality. And for the first time, that silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. I sat at the kitchen table longer than usual, not thinking about what they had done, but about what I had been doing in response. Waiting. Interpreting. Adjusting. Reacting to a system I never agreed to enter consciously. That was the key realization. I was reacting inside a structure I never chose. And every reaction confirmed my position inside it. So I stopped reacting. Not emotionally. Practically. That day, I turned off notifications from Daniel's number. Not blocked. Not erased. Just no longer immediate. That small action changed something deeper than I expected. Because suddenly, I wasn't available on demand. And availability had been my invisible role for years. In the afternoon, I went for a walk without my phone. The neighborhood looked the same, but I didn't move through it the same way. I noticed things I usually passed without seeing. A man repairing his fence slowly, without urgency. A woman sitting on her porch reading, not waiting for anything. A dog lying in the sun, completely unconcerned with time. It struck me then. Peace wasn't something people received. It was something they practiced. Back at home, I opened the folder Daniel had sent earlier. The one marked Family Matters. I read it again. But this time, I didn't read it as a mother. I read it as someone evaluating structure. Language changes meaning when emotion is removed from it. Words like stability, alignment, boundaries, reduced influence. What once sounded neutral now revealed intention. Systematic intention. I closed the folder. And instead of feeling hurt, I felt something else. Distance. Useful distance. That evening, Daniel called again. I let it ring. Once. Twice. Then I answered. Not immediately, but on my timing. "Mom," he said. I could hear frustration underneath his controlled tone. "You didn't respond earlier." "I saw the message," I said. Simple. Neutral. No apology. No justification. A pause. Then he said, "We need clarity." That word again. Clarity. As if confusion was something I was responsible for creating. "I have clarity," I replied. That caught him off guard. I could tell by the silence. "What do you mean?" he asked. I looked out the window. The sun was lowering. Soft light across everything. And I realized something important. I wasn't confused anymore. I just hadn't been speaking from clarity before. Now I was. "I understand the structure now," I said calmly. Another silence. Longer this time. He didn't know how to respond to that. Because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't negotiable. It was observation. Finally, he said, "Mom, this doesn't have to be complicated." I almost smiled, because that sentence had been used before. Every time complexity appeared, it was labeled as unnecessary. Every time clarity emerged, it was labeled as disruption. "I agree," I said softly. "This doesn't have to be complicated." Then I paused, "And I am choosing not to participate in it." The line went quiet. Not angry quiet. Not confused quiet. Displaced quiet. Like something had shifted in the expected script. "I'll call you later," he said finally. But I already knew what that meant. Delay. Reset. Control through postponement. After the call ended, I didn't feel anything surge inside me. No sadness. No anger. Just confirmation. I wrote in my journal, "I am no longer responding to their timing." Then I added, "I am operating on my own." And beneath it, one more line I didn't expect to write. "This is not withdrawal. This is repositioning." That night, I slept differently. Not lighter, not heavier, but uninterrupted by expectation. And for the first time since the wedding door closed in front of me, I wasn't inside their system at all. I was outside it, looking in, understanding it. It started with a phone call I didn't answer, then another, then a message, then a second message marked urgent. I saw all of them, but I didn't respond. Not immediately, not emotionally, not on their timing. And that, I realized, was the first real disruption I had ever created in their system. Because up until now, my role had always been predictable. I responded. I explained. I softened. I adjusted. Even my silence before had been temporary, waiting silence, not chosen silence. But this silence was different. It had direction. By the third day, Daniel showed up again. Not at the door this time, but outside my house, sitting in his car for almost 20 minutes before knocking. I watched him from the window, not hiding, just observing. He finally came to the door, and when I opened it, I could see it immediately. Confusion, not anger, not control. Confusion, because something in me had changed shape, and he didn't know how to respond to it. "Mom," he said carefully, "you're not answering calls." "I noticed," I replied calmly. That small sentence unsettled him more than I expected. Because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was factual. He stepped inside slowly, like someone entering a space that no longer felt familiar. "We just need to make sure we're on the same page," he said. Same page. That phrase again. As if there had always been one shared document of reality that I had simply stopped reading. "I'm on my own page," I said. He blinked. Once. Then again. Like he was recalculating something. "That's not what this is about," he said quickly. "This is about family communication." Family communication. Another soft structure. Another controlled frame. I gestured slightly toward the kitchen. "Would you like water?" I asked. A normal question. Too normal. He hesitated. "Yes," he said finally. I poured it. Slowly. No urgency. No emotional shift. Just movement. When I handed it to him, I noticed something new in his face. He was trying to predict me. That was the shift. Before, he had always assumed emotional response would guide everything. Now it wasn't there. And without it, he had no map. "Mom," he said again, softer. "This distance, it's not healthy." I looked at him. Really looked. And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled toward explanation. "I agree," I said. He nodded quickly, relieved. But I wasn't finished. "Distance created without consent isn't healthy," I continued. That stopped him. Completely. Because now the conversation had changed direction. He wasn't guiding it anymore. I was simply describing it. "I didn't mean to," he started. I raised my hand slightly. Not to silence him, but to stop the collapse into explanation. "I'm not asking you to justify it," I said. Silence. Heavy. Not emotional. Structural. For the first time, I saw something different in him. Uncertainty replacing assumption. He sat down at the table without being invited. A habit of familiarity. But even that felt slightly out of place now. "I don't understand what you want," he finally said. And there it was. The core question. Not what I wanted from him, but what I wanted outside of him. I took a seat opposite him. Not closer. Not further. Just aligned. "I don't want anything from you right now," I said. That sentence changed his expression immediately. Because it removed leverage. It removed expectation. It removed direction. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean I am no longer adjusting my life around response," I said. He looked down for a moment, then back up, and I saw it. For the first time, the realization that I was no longer part of his reactive system. that I wasn't waiting to be managed anymore, that I wasn't an emotional variable he could calibrate decisions around. "I think you're misunderstanding this," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "I think I finally understand it correctly." That line landed differently. I could see it in his stillness. Because misunderstanding implies correction. Understanding implies permanence. He stood up slowly, uncomfortable now, not in control, not losing control, but unable to locate it in me anymore. "I'll come back later," he said. But this time, it didn't sound like authority. It sounded like retreat. And when he left, I didn't follow him to the door. I didn't watch the car leave. I stayed exactly where I was. Because something had already settled. Not conflict. Not resolution. But repositioning. That night, I wrote in my journal, "They are starting to notice I am no longer responding." Then I paused and added, "The system is reacting to my absence of reaction." And finally, that is the first real imbalance. I closed the book, and for the first time since the wedding, I wasn't being pulled by their actions anymore. I was watching their reactions to mine. It happened without warning. Not a confrontation, not a call, not even a message I chose not to answer. Just absence. But this time, it felt different. Because I wasn't the one creating it. It was them. 3 days passed after Daniel's last visit, and nothing followed. No follow-up call. No attempt to clarify. No pressure disguised as concern. At first, I thought it was another delay tactic. Another pause in their usual rhythm of control. But the pause stretched. And then it stopped feeling like strategy. It started feeling like adjustment. Like they were responding to something in me that had shifted too far to predict. On the 4th day, I realized something subtle. The silence was no longer directed at me. It was adjusting around me. That realization didn't come with emotion. It came with observation. I went through my morning slowly. Coffee, window, light, the same routine. But everything felt slightly out of sync. Like I was no longer inside the timing of anyone else's expectations. Around noon, I received a letter. Physical again. No return address. This time, I didn't hesitate. I opened it immediately. Inside was a short note. Typed. Not handwritten. Which already told me something. Less emotional. More controlled. It read, "We think it's best if we reduce unnecessary emotional disruption for everyone involved." I read it once. Then again. There was no signature. But I didn't need one. I already knew the source. This wasn't Daniel alone. This was coordination. System language. Not family language. My fingers tightened slightly around the paper. Not from anger. From confirmation. They were shifting again. But not toward me. Around me. As if adjusting the structure to exclude influence without confrontation. That was the moment I understood something deeper. I wasn't being fought anymore. I was being contained. Softly. Strategically. Without contact. That evening, I went for a drive. No destination. Just movement. The roads felt longer than usual. Not because they changed, but because I wasn't following anyone's direction anymore. At a stoplight, I noticed something I hadn't before. A billboard advertising family counseling services. Smiling faces. Perfect lighting. Perfect words. Reconnect. Restore. Rebuild. I stared at it longer than I should have. Because I understood now what those words often meant. Not healing, but reorganization. Control dressed as repair. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights immediately. I stood in the dark hallway for a long time. Not thinking about Daniel. Not thinking about Melissa. But thinking about structure. Systems don't always collapse when they are challenged. Sometimes they adapt. And adaptation can look like peace from the outside. But inside, it is still design. That night, I wrote in my journal, "They are no longer reacting to me directly. They are adjusting the system around my absence." I paused, then added, "That means I am no longer inside their influence zone." And finally, one last line. That is why the silence feels different now. I closed the book, and for the first time since the wedding door closed, I understood something I hadn't before. I was no longer part of the conversation, not because I was removed, but because the conversation had moved around me, and I was finally standing outside of it. It was a Tuesday when Daniel came back. Not loudly, not dramatically, no car rushing into the driveway, no urgency in his steps, just a knock, 2 taps, controlled, careful, like he wasn't sure what version of me would answer anymore. I opened the door, and for the first time since the wedding, I didn't feel pulled backward. I didn't feel like a mother waiting to be accepted. I just stood there, present. "So," I said quietly, "you've adjusted again." He looked tired. Not physically, but in the way people look when they realize something they built isn't behaving the way they expected anymore. Mom, he said, we need to reset this. I didn't move aside. I didn't invite him in immediately, because something in me already knew. This wasn't a conversation about reunion. It was a conversation about boundaries they were still trying to redraw around me. I'm listening, I said. He nodded, as if relieved by permission, but then paused, because the structure wasn't responding the way it used to. We didn't mean for things to become this distant, he said. That word again. We didn't mean. As if impact required intention. As if exclusion needed to be conscious to be real. I believe you, I said calmly. That surprised him, because I didn't resist. I didn't argue. I didn't collapse into emotion. I just observed. He stepped forward slightly, this time unsure. I think we can fix this, he said. I looked at him for a long moment, and I realized something simple. Fix implies something is still broken in the same system. But I wasn't inside that system anymore. You're trying to restore a version of me that existed inside your structure, I said. Silence. He didn't respond immediately, because that sentence didn't leave space for negotiation. It was identification, not accusation. I'm not that version anymore, I continued. A long pause. The air between us felt different now. Not tense, not emotional, just redefined. What do you want then? He finally asked. That question used to have power over me. Now it didn't, because I wasn't responding to absence anymore. I was responding to presence. I want clarity, I said. He nodded quickly. Yes, we can do that. But I raised my hand slightly. No, I said softly. I already have it. That stopped him completely. For the first time, he looked like he didn't know where to place himself in the conversation. Because I wasn't asking. I wasn't waiting. I wasn't needing. I understand what happened, I said. I understand how it happened. And I understand why I was no longer included. His eyes shifted. Not away, but downward. Because acknowledgement always changes position. And I am not angry, I added. That surprised him more than anything else. Because anger would have kept the system alive. Anger would have kept engagement possible. But I wasn't there anymore. I just needed to know it clearly. I finished. Silence again. This time, heavier. But not painful. Final. Daniel swallowed. I didn't know it would feel like this, he said quietly. And for the first time, I believed that part of him. But belief didn't change structure. Only awareness did. I know, I said. And I did. Because systems don't require malice to reshape someone's place in them. They only require repetition. He stood there for a moment longer, waiting for something. A return. A softening. A reversal. But I didn't give it. Not because I was cold, but because I was no longer inside the cycle that required reaction. Finally, he nodded. Slowly. I should go, he said. Yes, I replied. Not as rejection. As conclusion. He walked back down the path. This time, I didn't watch for long. Because I didn't need to. When he left, I closed the door gently. Not as ending, but as recognition. And I stood there for a long time in the quiet house. Not broken. Not healed. Just no longer positioned. Later that night, I wrote my final journal entry. They thought they removed me. But I stepped outside before the removal was complete. And from outside, I can finally see the shape of everything. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and for the first time since the wedding, I didn't wonder where I belonged anymore. Because I finally understood something simple. I didn't lose my place. I stopped accepting the one they assigned me.